Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, you'll are having a wonderful day today. So, I thought that I would review a Dante's Boxing Nation video because one of his boys, Jermall Charlo, recently has not looked very good to the public. Jermall Charlo, as of late, and I've been saying this about Jermall Charlo for a very, 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 very long time. He talks a lot of shit, but basically, he's all cap. He's all smoke and mirrors. Basically, what that means is that he talks the talk, but he don't walk the walk. It is what it is. Jermall Charlo, in my opinion, he can say that he's serious about knocking all these guys out and taking on all these big fights. There's a reason why Jermall Charlo overall didn't seem too excited about facing David Benavidez. It's not only even that fight. He didn't seem too excited to face Demetrius Andrade. He didn't seem too excited to face David Benavidez. He really hasn't seemed too excited to face any of these top contenders. But what these guys want you to believe that just because Jermall Charlo calls these people out, that he's serious about fighting them. Now, maybe Jermall Charlo is now serious about facing David Benavidez, but he didn't sound too excited about the possibility of this fight happening. And Jermall Charlo, for apparently wanting that Canelo Alvarez fight, I think that this would be a perfect opportunity that if you do believe that Canelo Alvarez is avoiding you for some reason, then this is the perfect way to trap Canelo Alvarez in a corner. And David Benavidez is alleging the same thing. So there's really no reason why this fight should not happen, because Jermall Charlo, according to him, he's going to whip David Benavidez's ass. According to him, he is going to knock David Benavidez out. That's what he said. And I think that this would be a very interesting fight. I'm also going to break it down a little bit because I do hope that this fight happens next. I think that it is a fantastic fight, somewhere around 50-50. And we're going to get into it. So let's just see what Dante's Boxing Nation has to say.
Finally, we have some good news to report. Because I'm telling you, it was getting to the point where it was depressing me. Hearing all of this bad news. Fights that we think we're going to get, and then all of a sudden one of the fighters pulls the plug on that fight. Well,
you mean Jermall Charlo making excuses? Call it what it is, man. Call it what it is. But I noticed that you haven't necessarily mentioned that Charlo was ducking David Benavidez, or you haven't said anything like that. But you have no problem alleging certain fighters are ducking other fighters, fighters that you don't like, or fighters that you're trying to tear down. I noticed the very same thing with Aki TV. Anyway.
Looks like now there's a very, very good chance that we may actually get one of those fights that the boxing fans are craving for right now. And that is David Benavidez versus Jermall Charlo. Because Jermall Charlo just did an interview with Brian Custer. And for the first time, it sounded like he said it without a doubt that he is fighting David Benavidez. Matter of fact, let me go ahead and just...
I'll believe it when I see it. Because to be honest with you, Jermall Charlo, he's been talking a lot of shit for years and really has not backed any of it up. Really, he's been all bark and no bite for a certain amount of years. So, it is what it is. Or what does he call himself? Lions only. He's been all roar and no bite, whatever you want to call it. Anyway, I really don't. I'm not really going to believe it until I see it. And I hope this fight does happen because I think that's a great fight. But anyway.
Let's play a small clip of Brian Custer's interview with Jermall Charlo. Eventually, Brian Custer, he's going to drop the full interview so you guys get to watch it when he releases it. But check this out.
Do you see you and David Benavidez fight?
Yeah. Let's make that fight happen. I'm going to knock his little punk ass
out. He's been saying that for the past, I don't know. He's been saying that for the past year. Once again, we'll see. I'll believe it when I see it. Once again, these LDBC and new media members, with their favorite fighters, when it comes down to it, they base it, once again, they allege constantly that Vasyl Lomachenko is ducking, Canelo Alvarez is ducking, and they could be. Who knows? I haven't really paid attention much to the Vasyl Lomachenko-Devin Haney situation. Really, the only reason why I tune into this one is because the Jermall Charlo situation has always interested me a little bit because I can tell when the fighter is not serious about facing any top contenders, and Jermall Charlo is one of those fighters. Not just not facing David Benavidez, he's not interested in facing any of these top contenders. It is what it is. There's a reason why for the past few years he really has not fought any worthy opponents. But it is what it is.
I promise that. I put that on everything I love. I give him about 4 rounds, 5 rounds. I knock him out about
Yeah, we'll see about that, Jermall. But anyway.
5 rounds, 6 rounds, no more. He get hit too much. I'm powerful.
And let me tell you what, I don't disagree with Jermall there. David Benavidez, I think, does get hit a little bit too much. But Jermall, you have that very same issue. Your defense is not really elite there, man. It is what it is. And then that was really actually the reason why, if the Canelo Alvarez versus Jermall Charlo fight were to happen, I know that the LDBC and new media are backing Jermall Charlo, of course, for obvious reasons, but it is what it is, and some people don't agree with me, but it's whatever. But when it comes down to it, Jermall Charlo, in my opinion, although he is a great fighter, or a borderline great fighter, it depends on what you mean by great, but when it comes down to it, Jermall Charlo, when it comes to the Canelo Alvarez's, I think that he's just too flawed, and really, to be honest with you, I think Jermall Charlo is probably the perfect type of fighter for Canelo Alvarez, because there's just nothing that I don't think he's going to beat Canelo Alvarez in. I don't think he's going to beat him in anything. Jermall Charlo does not throw enough. He does not move his head enough. He does not have a strict enough defense. And when it comes down to it, he has a problem with not letting his hands go sometimes. I just don't see a fighter like that beating Canelo Alvarez. Now, does he have power? Yes. Does he have as much power as a Gennady Golovkin? Was he even as skilled as a Gennady Golovkin? No, he wasn't. And a certain amount of people overall are not going to agree with that. But it is what it is. Now, Jermall Charlo is a decently skilled fighter. That's not me saying that he's a trash fighter. But it is what it is. I just don't see enough of a skill set from him. Really, to be honest with you, I don't see a good enough skill set from a lot of these fighters to beat Canelo Alvarez. The only one from the old 160-pound weight class that I possibly see giving Canelo Alvarez a challenge, and that's only because of his style. That's not really because I see him as more skilled than Canelo, is maybe Billy Joe Saunders. And, you know, if Billy Joe Saunders fought Jermall Charlo or Demetrius Andrade, I'm not really sure who I'd bet to win in those fights. Maybe Billy Joe by a little bit. But if Demetrius Andrade or Jermall Charlo won those fights, I wouldn't be surprised either. So, I don't know. But of course, that's fight math. You know, fights don't always work out that way. But when it comes down to it, when it comes to the 160-pounders, and I'm not the only one to think this, Billy Joe Saunders might give Canelo his best test. When it comes to the 168-pound weight class, well, that might actually be Caleb Plant, probably because he's the most slickest one there. And then when it comes to the 175-pound division, that's when things get really serious. To me, those are really the only fighters that can for sure challenge Canelo at this point in his career. The Artur Beterbiev, the Dimitri Bivols. Those are really the only fighters that I could see possibly beating Canelo right now. I'm not going to say possibly, but, you know, that have a very decent chance.
I'll explode on him. Trust me. I do my thing. I've been doing this all my life. Put me in there. Put me in there with the... I'm a lion, bro. Let's get it.
All right.
It's here.
All right, so you heard it right there from Jermall Charlo, once again doing his interview with Brian Custer on the Last Stand podcast. Once again, he'll have the full interview out real soon, and you guys can watch it over there on his channel. Now, let me just start by saying this. Even though it's not a complete guarantee that the fight is going to come to fruition,
it's not a guarantee at all. But you have to make Jermall Charlo look good, because Jermall Charlo is one of your boys that you're trying to promote. It is what it is. You know, do I believe that Jermall Charlo is serious about facing David Benavidez? He could be. We'll see what happens. I hope that he is serious, because that would probably be the biggest win of his career if you're able to defeat David Benavidez. Because, to be honest with you, you can argue that Jermall Charlo still has not defeated any A-class fighters in his career. Now, maybe you could say that J-Rock Williams, Julian Williams, I believe his name is an A-class fighter. He certainly was looked at one as one at the time. But there's some losses. There's that loss that overall he should have not had in his career against that guy. What was that one dude's name? It's the guy that Jermall Charlo just recently knocked out. Was it Rosario something? I can't remember. Anyway.
this is the very first time I've heard Jermall Charlo talk about the Benavidez fight, and I'm convinced now. This is the first time.
Well, why would you be convinced? Charlo pretty much said the same shit that he said last year and that he said a little bit before that. or that he said a little bit after that, excuse me, a little bit before this one in this most recent interview. He's been saying this for the past year. David Benavidez overall finally called him out for it, so we'll see what happens. I hope Jermall Charlo is serious because I would love to see that fight. But do I think that he's 100% serious? It's hard to tell. Once again, like I said, when it comes to Jermall Charlo, I'm not going to believe it till I see it.
I've been completely convinced that Jermall Charlo really wants this fight and it's going to happen. I mean, when you watch that clip, you could just see there was a different type of energy from Jermall Charlo. It sounded like all of a sudden, not only does he want this fight, but he's on a mission.
It sounded like he was trying to convince himself like he's going to beat Benavidez' ass. It's what it looked like to me. But that's not always a bad thing, because to me, I think a fighter does need to convince themselves sometimes that they're going to win. Sometimes you got to fake it till you make it, I guess. I don't know. That's just the way that I look at it. But it is what it is. And Jermall Charlo does get very pent up off of emotion. So we'll see what happens. And maybe that's why Dante thinks the fight's now going to happen, because maybe he saw the same thing I did. I don't know. But we'll see what happens.
To make the fight come to fruition. Now, Jermall Charlo, he said a lot in that clip. But what stood out the most to me is when he said he gets hit too much. He gets hit too much. And the reason why that stood out...
And I agree. David Benavidez, in my opinion, does get hit too much. Manny Pacquiao to Errol Spence Jr. also said that he gets hit too much. But I don't know if that means that Manny Pacquiao is serious about fighting Errol Spence right now. Maybe he does want to. I don't know. We'll see what happens. I would actually love to see that fight because, to be honest with you, I see what Manny Pacquiao is talking about now. Errol Spence, to me, is an A-grade fighter. Even if Pacquiao were to beat Spence, Spence obviously is the real deal. There is no doubt about that. But I see what Manny Pacquiao is talking about because Errol Spence, his feet are a bit slow at times, and he does not have necessarily A-grade head movement. And Pacquiao works angles very, very well. He's very speedy. He's very quick. He has pretty decent footwork, even at this age. So would it surprise me at all if Pacquiao were able to beat a Terrence Crawford or an Errol Spence? But more likely an Errol Spence just because of his style. It wouldn't surprise me at all. But I would love to see that fight.
The most to me is because I kept telling you guys in previous videos, it wouldn't really make sense for Jermall Charlo to avoid someone like David Benavidez because styles make fights. And it seems...
And that would be the best situation if he wants to fight Canelo. If he truly is serious, allegedly, about facing Canelo Alvarez. That would be a great fight. Because if you really do want to push Canelo Alvarez into a corner, if you believe that he's avoiding you when it comes down to it, then why not fight David Benavidez? And do I personally believe that Canelo Alvarez is avoiding Jermall Charlo? I'm not sure. You know, I've heard a lot of news by these LDBC and new media outlets, but of course, we all know what their motivations are. So, I can't really trust them with anything, but it is what it is. I'd have to look a little bit further into it. What I'll say is this. Canelo has maneuvered around certain fighters before. Now, Canelo has fought a lot of great fighters in his career, but this would not be the first time if I were to dig deeper into it and think that he is avoiding certain fighters. It certainly would not be the first time that I've seen this with Canelo. When Gennady Golovkin was on the come-up, I think for sure that he was avoiding a Golovkin fight. But it is what it is. And then finally he was forced into a corner. But it is what it is. Anyway. But it's a little bit less likely for me to believe Charlo because Charlo, he basically caps off on everybody. And then when it comes to someone calling him out, he doesn't seem too serious. So it is what it is.
Benavidez's style is tailor-made for Jermall Charlo's style. Now, don't get me wrong. This doesn't guarantee a win just because you're fighting someone whose style is tailor-made to yours. You still...
I get where you're coming from, Dante. But when it comes down to it, I'm not necessarily going to say that David Benavidez is tailor-made for Jermall Charlo. To be honest with you, I'm not really going to say that. I think David Benavidez is more tailor-made for a Caleb Plant because Jermall Charlo, to me, he's not the worst slick fighter that I've seen. He does have some slick moves, but he's not as slick as, say, as like a Caleb Plant or a Billy Joe Saunders to where, he is as maneuverable as those two. Now, of course, he'd be more slicker than a Callum Smith, or he'd be more slicker than, say, I'm trying to think of who else. Can't really think of any others at the time right now, but of course, when it comes down to it, he does have more power probably than a Billy Joe Saunders or a Caleb Plant. In my opinion, he does anyway. Certainly more than a Billy Joe Saunders. But Caleb Plant, I'm not really sure how powerful he would be. But Jermall Charlo does seem to have more natural power than him. So that would be interesting. And David Benavidez is very hittable. He's also not impossible to hurt. I've seen David Benavidez rocked and knocked down before. Which, to be honest with you, I think that's why he'd get his ass kicked against Canelo Alvarez. Because David Benavidez, to be honest with you, even though I don't think he's the worst skilled fighter out there, do I think he's an A-class skilled fighter? I think he's an A-class fighter, but I don't think he has A-class skills. I don't think he has an A-grade skill set. I think he throws punches and bunches, and I think he overwhelms a lot of opponents. But how many elite opponents can we really say that David Benavidez has faced? I think maybe he has a win over Anthony or Andre Durrell, one of the Durrell brothers. I can't remember. But besides that, how many big wins does David Benavidez have in his career? So it is what it is.
Have to put in the work.
And he still has not looked overly impressive. He's gotten hit way too much in his career. David Benavidez, to me, reminds me of, a decent athlete, but from a skill set perspective, a regular Mexican fighter. That's what he reminds me of. Which is why, in that fight between Jermall Charlo and David Benavidez, even though I would say it's 50-50, I would give the edge to Jermall Charlo. David Benavidez might have the slight size advantage, but it's not going to be by that much, so that is not going to be a viable excuse in this fight. But when it comes down to it, it is going to be skills versus skills. And who is going to win this matchup? In my opinion, it would probably be Jermall Charlo. I think he's a much better I wouldn't say much better counterpuncher, but I believe he's a better counterpuncher than David Benavidez. I think that David Benavidez is way too open. I think David Benavidez is going to try to go in there, and he's going to get hit up by Jermall Charlo. And it is very possible that Jermall Charlo was able to hurt David Benavidez. And let me also tell you this, because a certain amount of the people, if Jermall Charlo beats David Benavidez, which in my opinion I will favor Jermall Charlo in that fight, a certain amount of people are going to say, wow, Canelo Alvarez must be real afraid of Jermall Charlo now. They're going to say that. Let me tell you what. It's not really going to matter to me if he beats David Benavidez, because David Benavidez, in my opinion, I don't really know what he's going to be like once he faces an A-class fighter. To be honest with you, I don't even know if David Benavidez would beat a Callum Smith. Now, maybe he would, but who knows? Callum Smith, I think, is a pretty decent fighter. To me, he's an A-grade fighter, at least for the super middleweight division. I don't know who David Benavidez would beat in terms of the elites of that division, because to be honest with you, I believe he does have a win over one of the Durrell brothers, but I never was really overly impressed with either of the Durrell brothers anyway. So it is what it is.
My only point was, now I know that Jermall Charlo, he has been paying attention. He's been doing his homework. And I'm sure David Benavidez and his father and trainer, they're going to do their homework as well. This is going to be a great fight, guys, for sure. In the last...
At US Cellular, we believe everyone deserves 5G, not just New York and LA, but cities like...
Last video I did talking about this fight, I had a couple black people in the comment section asking me the question, why does Jermall Charlo have to fight Canelo, or why does he have to fight David Benavidez, Dante? They were asking me this. They were like, he shouldn't have to fight him. He's at a different weight class. I think some people, when they heard me...
Why not? Apparently, according to Charlo, Charlo is going to whip that man's ass. And Jermall, you're supposed to be, apparently on that Canelo Alvarez level. Now, of course, if you're a fighter, you're supposed to believe that you're the best fighter in the world. But according to the LDBC new media, Jermall Charlo really wants that fight. Well, you want that fight. Canelo Alvarez is moving up and down the weight classes. Why not go up to 168 and prove your worth? Why not go up to 168 and say, hey, I'm going to fight one of these top guys, and I'm going to force Canelo Alvarez to face me? Because Canelo said that his plan is to unify the super middleweight division. That's what he said. So, why not try to make yourself a big name at 168? So we'll see what happens.
Say that Jermall, he needs to fight David Benavidez to get a Canelo fight. Some people interpreted that as me saying, you don't deserve to fight Canelo Alvarez. And the only way you can qualify is if you fight David Benavidez.
Well, when it comes down to it, Dante, what I'll say is this. What would really get Jermall Charlo a fight with Canelo, possibly, is to face David Benavidez. And sometimes certain fighters have a tough time getting fights, or they're not really serious about getting those fights in the first place. So if Jermall Charlo really wants a fight with Canelo Alvarez, he will fight David Benavidez. And let me also say this about Gennady Golovkin, because do I believe that Canelo Alvarez was avoiding a Gennady Golovkin fight? In my opinion, yes, I do. But when it comes down to it, Gennady Golovkin possibly could have got a Canelo Alvarez fight sooner, had he fought some of the top guys that were calling him out. Because let's remember, Gennady Golovkin was called out by Andre Ward, and I don't believe that he wanted to face Andre Ward. Now that one I can understand a little bit, but one fight that he should have took was Lara. Erislandy Lara. Personally, one of my favorite fighters of the past 10 years. I always thought that in his prime he was extremely slick, very maneuverable, great defensive fighter. Of course, now without his flaws. One of pretty much his main flaw being that he's not offensive enough in certain fights. But when it comes down to it, you can actually argue that Lara really should have never lost a fight in his career. You can have a legitimate argument about that to this day. So it is what it is. Gennady Golovkin should have took that fight. So certain fighters that want those big-time fights, if they really, really, really want those big-time fights, they're going to face anyone that they need to get to that person's way or to get to that person's path. But anyway.
It wasn't so much of me saying that he doesn't deserve to fight Canelo Alvarez. What I was basically saying is, look, man, even if Jermall Charlo were to fight David Benavidez, and let's just say hypothetically, Jermall Charlo, he beats David, Canelo still may not want to fight him. But
now, Dante, one question I'm going to have for you is this, because we all know, according to you, Gennady Golovkin is a hype job. According to you. Because he lost to Canelo Alvarez, even though he almost unified the whole entire middleweight division. What I'll say is this. If Jermall Charlo loses to David Benavidez, a fighter who has 0 A-class wins in his career, or debatably none, is Jermall Charlo a hype job? I just want to know that. But anyway.
The pressure is going to be unbearable. And that's what you guys don't understand. There's a lot of things to...
I understand that, Dante. I've been saying that for the past, I don't know how many years about Jermall Charlo. Okay? I've been saying that about, I don't know how many times about Jermall Charlo. That's what I understand, and that's what you should have been talking about earlier. But anyway.
Factor in.
Just like if Terrence Crawford wants to fight Errol Spence Jr., if he truly believes that Errol Spence is avoiding him, then he should take his little shoes over to the PBC, sign with them, because that's where all the welterweights are. Then trap Sean Porter or Danny Garcia in a corner if you believe that they're avoiding you. And then eventually, I assure you, if you believe that Errol Spence is avoiding you, you're going to get that Errol Spence fight. And if you were to fight those guys and beat those guys and still be an undefeated fighter, maybe even if you had one loss on your record, you might be able to demand a 50-50 split with Errol Spence Jr. But you're not going to be able to do that right now. And Errol Spence right now is telling Terrence Crawford that he might do 80-20 or 70-30. A certain amount of people don't really get what Errol Spence is saying. What Errol Spence is really saying, he says, look, we can make the fight. But it's 60-40 my way or it's no way. That's basically what Errol Spence is saying. But anyway.
Right here. For starters, just think about Jermall Charlo moving up in weight, fighting the most dangerous and arguably the best super middleweight in the division. He's an underdog.
I personally wouldn't say that he's the best super middleweight in the division. The best super middleweight in the division, I would have to say, is Canelo Alvarez. But it is what it is. Caleb Plant probably right now to me would be second. But it is what it is. You know, a great fight actually would have been Caleb Plant versus David Benavidez. That would have been an interesting fight. I probably would have put my money on Caleb Plant. Because David Benavidez, he just gets hit a little bit too much. But it is what it is. And Caleb Plant, he's a very decently slick fighter. He's very talented.
All going in.
He's one of those very rare American white boys that can box.
The majority of fans, they believe David is going to beat him. If Jermall Charlo were to beat someone like that, and then the fact that it's a Mexican fighter, now Canelo Alvarez is going to be pressured to avenge that loss. I mean, some of you guys were saying, well, if Canelo wouldn't fight Jermall at 160, what makes you think he's going to fight him at 168? The circumstances will be completely different.
I agree. And if you believe that Canelo Alvarez is avoiding you, then this is your perfect opportunity, Jermall. If Jermall Charlo does not take this fight, that not only will mean that he's not serious about the David Benavidez fight, that will also mean that he's not too serious about the Canelo Alvarez fight. So it is what it is.
If Jermall beats the elephant in the room. See, he didn't do that when he was at 160. I said this many times. If Jermall and Demetrius Andrade would have fought against each other, that alone would have put more pressure on Canelo to...
I agree, and I said, Dante, I've been ahead of you. I've been saying this for a very, very long time. I've been saying this for a very, 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 very long time. And guess who didn't want that fight? Jermall Charlo. Guess who declined that fight? Guess who declined the deal? Jermall Charlo. So it is what it is. And apparently he didn't want to do that fight because he doesn't want to go over to the zone. No problem. You don't want to go over to the zone where the rest of the big boy middleweights are? No problem. No problem at all. But guess what? You have some people at the 168-pound division on the PBC side, you know, same as your stable. You know, you have some over at your stable. You have Caleb Plant. You have David Benavidez. Hell, maybe even fight a Jermall brother or two when it comes down to it. Fight those guys. Maybe even a Callum Smith. Now, Callum Smith, he might be with the zone, but that fight probably would not be that hard to make. So, when it comes down to it, fight one of them boys. When it comes down, if you can't get some of the other big names. Fight one of them. David Benavidez apparently wants to fight you. So go ahead and fight David Benavidez. Because not only would that be a great fight, that is pretty much your perfect opportunity to possibly get Canelo Alvarez next. And if Canelo Alvarez does not fight you at least a couple of fights after that, then we know that Canelo Alvarez is avoiding a Jermall Charlo.
Take the fight. Not a guarantee he would have did it, but this is a little bit different because, once again, if Jermall were to beat David, he's beating the Mexican fighter. The only other Mexican fighter who's a champion is Canelo Alvarez. Canelo just can't sit on the sidelines after watching Jermall Charlo move up in weight and then beat the guy that Canelo didn't want to fight. The most dangerous guy in the division, because David is the boogeyman at 168.
Well, I don't know if he's really the most dangerous guy at 168. But when it comes down to the overall, what I'll say is this. He certainly is, you know, a decent fighter. I would say that he's an A-grade fighter until later on if we figure out otherwise, and he loses almost every big fight in his career. We would have to see. But either way, man, if this fight happens, I would be very, very excited. If that were even a pay-per-view fight, I would buy it on pay-per-view.
So the truth is, I truly believe, regardless who wins this fight, David or Jermall Charlo, they'll be in a position to where, of course, everyone is going to want the Canelo fight, but they won't even need the Canelo fight as bad as they needed it before. I mean, this is kind of analogous to Deontay Wilder constantly chasing for the Anthony Joshua fight.
Allegedly. But you know who's fought every top contender at heavyweight? Anthony Joshua. You know who has fought very rarely any top contender at heavyweight? Deontay Wilder. So you can sit here all you want that Deontay Wilder was chasing after that Anthony Joshua fight. Deontay Wilder was never serious about that Anthony Joshua fight. He was never serious about that Anthony Joshua fight in the first place. It is what it is. I don't care what anybody says. He was never serious about that Anthony Joshua fight, so just stop.
All of a sudden, he got the Tyson Fury fight. Once he got the
Need a change of scenery? Kayak searches hundreds of travel sites for hotels.
Tyson Fury fight, he didn't really need the AJ fight as much. And if he would have beat...
Now, isn't it interesting overall that Tyson Fury and AJ, they seem overall to get the fight signed off? Isn't it also interesting how Anthony Joshua can get a fight with the Vladimir Klitschko? Sure, Klitschko was coming off of a loss, but we all know Klitschko, even at that time, still was an A-grade fighter. Isn't it interesting how Anthony Joshua can get a lot of these big fights, but Deontay Wilder, apparently everyone is just avoiding him? Same with Jermall Charlo. Doesn't it seem interesting? Apparently everyone is avoiding Jermall Charlo. Once again, guys, if it seems too good to be true, it is. So it is what it is.
Anthony Joshua, it would have put him in a far better position when it comes to landing an AJ fight. I think the same thing applies here. You guys have to remember, before Canelo Alvarez fought Edeslani Lara, he avoided Lara for 2 whole years.
I can't remember overall if he avoided Lara or not. What I'll say is this. He pretty much fought Lara exactly at the right time. Because Lara, there really was no other contender to face at that division. And to be honest with you, I thought Lara won that fight. I say that to this day. I still think Lara won that fight. But when it comes down to it, what I'll say is this. That fight pretty much happened at the perfect time. Because Lara, he beat Austin Trout. He beat Alfredo Ngulu, two past opponents of Canelo Alvarez, and he knocked out Alfredo Ngulu, although he wasn't as dominant against Ngulu as Canelo Alvarez was. That one was a close fight because Lara made it a close fight by getting knocked down twice. And then overall against Austin Trout, he pretty much dominated Austin Trout.
You know why he fought him? The reason why Canelo ended up fighting Lara is because Lara jumped on the stage after one of Canelo.
I agree, and let me tell you what, man. That boy Lara, that boy Adesanya Lara, my guy Adesanya Lara, man, he was always serious about taking those big fights. Adesanya Lara was one of the most avoided fighters in boxing within the past 10 years. No doubt about it. And even Lara sometimes could still get some of the top fights. So once again, when you have this Jermall Charlo dude and these other guys saying that they're so avoided and all this sort of shit, they can't get a fight, it's bullshit, man. Even Guillermo Rigondeaux got a fight against Vasyl Lomachenko and almost no one wanted to face him. You know, when it came down to it, even Adesanya Lara eventually got a fight against Jarrett Hurd, or he got a fight against Austin Trout, or even eventually Canelo Alvarez fought him. You know, well, once again, when you have a fighter that can't seem to get any of the top contenders or any of the top fighters, period, it's a bunch of shit, man. That's all it is.
Alvarez's fight. He pushed for the fight, and after he did that,
and Adesanya Lara was serious because he got in Canelo Alvarez's face. He went to his press conference. That's how you knew Adesanya Lara was serious. He didn't just do some cheap talking bullshit. He went to Canelo Alvarez's face and he said, "When are we going to do this fight? When are we going to do this fight?" And you know what else Lara did? He also fought a lot of the top contenders. He beat Austin Trout. He beat Alfredo Ngulu. That's how you know a fighter is real about taking these top contenders or taking these big fights.
Canelo got a lot of backlash from fans straight from Mexico who were constantly pressuring him to take the Lara fight. Once he started to see the way his own people were acting, that's when he took the fight. Even Oscar De La Hoya, he admitted, "I didn't want Canelo to take this fight." But it was Canelo.
That's true. He did say that.
That pushed.
And Oscar De La Hoya probably paid that one judge off. That judge, by the way, that scored it, I can't remember. I think he scored it 9 rounds 3 for Canelo Alvarez in that Adesanya Lara fight. One of the worst judges I've seen, because that's not the only time I've seen him score very badly in a fight. Like, he scored it 9 rounds and 3 for Canelo Alvarez in that fight. Absolutely ridiculous.
For it.
I believe that was also the same paid-off judge overall that scored the fight for Scott Quigg over Carl Frampton. I could be wrong about that, but check me up on it.
So this is the type of pressure that would be put on Canelo if Jermall were to move up in weight and beat David Benavidez. There will be more pressure put on Canelo if Jermall wins as opposed to David Benavidez winning.
I agree. And if Canelo Alvarez does not fight him by next year, because I assume that this fight probably is going to happen, I'm not really sure when this fight's going to happen, probably later on this year, but maybe I'm wrong. It could happen in June or July. Who the hell knows? If Canelo Alvarez does not face one of them, whoever the winner of this fight is, that's assuming this fight does happen. If Canelo Alvarez does not fight one of these guys early of next year, that's how you know Canelo Alvarez is avoiding these guys. All right? Then there will be no question.
Because now you have someone who's not Mexican that beat the Mexican fighter. This is why that pride is going to kick in when a lot of Mexican fans starts telling Canelo Alvarez, "We got to show that we're still number one. So you need to go ahead and avenge that loss that David Benavidez suffered." So I truly believe this fight is going to be a game changer if it happens. It's going to be a game changer. It's going to definitely change the winner's life completely. You know, guys, I'm not going to lie. Teofimo Lopez and Ryan Garcia, they got my hopes up high a couple of times.
I think Teofimo Lopez beats the shit out of Ryan Garcia. I think Ryan Garcia is the weakest link out of any of the elite 135-pounders. But that's just my opinion, maybe. Although I will say this, he's a little bit better than I thought because I did not expect him to knock out Luke Campbell the way that he did. So maybe I'm wrong. We'll see what happens. But Teofimo right now seems to be the man at 135.
Actually believe them whenever they would say at the last minute.
And if Lomachenko wants a rematch against Teofimo Lopez, what he should do is that he should fight Devin Haney for the WBC strap. is what he should do. Now, I'm hearing a bunch of conflicts between them back and forth. I really don't know what's going on, so I'm not going to comment on it. But if Lomachenko is truly saying that he doesn't want to fight Devin Haney next, then he cannot blame anyone but himself for not getting a possible rematch against Teofimo Lopez. And to be honest with you, Lomachenko should have did more in that match against Teofimo Lopez in the first place. I mean, you're not going to win a fight by not throwing anything in the first 6 rounds. But it is what it is. Anyway.
You know, one interview say they're not going to fight, or Tio, for example. On Monday, he says he's not fighting Devin Haney. And then on Wednesday, he says, you know, I talked to my dad, and now Devin Haney has to be next. I was believing Tio when he said that. Because as a real boxing fan, I really wanted to see this fight. I feel the same way when it comes...
Well, you have to go based off of people's actions, not their words. And that's why, you know, everyone always says, oh, he called him out. There's such a thing as wolf tickets, meaning that people talk the talk, but they don't walk the walk. A lot of the times, these guys, they can be full of it. It is what it is. So.
It is Jermall Charlo, David Benavidez situation. But I'm a lot more optimistic. The style matchup is one reason.
Make a different future. Start different at GoDaddy.com.
But the other reason is...
Well, when you say style matchup, are you excited because you think this is going to make an exciting fight, or do you think overall that it's just the best possible win for Charlo? I have to guess overall that you're trying to put it out there that it's an exciting fight, but you do want Charlo to win this fight. Make no mistake about it.
Jermall Charlo has nowhere else to go. Like I said, he's not going to get a Canelo Alvarez fight because Canelo's not going to fight him. And Jermall wasn't interested in facing Demetrius Andrade, so where else would he go?
He has nowhere else to go, Dante. He's trapped himself in his own corner. He has to take this fight. He has to take this fight or basically admit that he's not serious about taking a certain amount of these other top contenders. You turned down Demetrius Andrade because apparently he was on DAZN. You could have easily went there for a year and possibly went back to the PBC, possibly. You know, it is what it is. I'm sure that Al Heyman would have not minded taking you back. So it is what it is. But whatever. So overall, you know, you don't sign with DAZN. You don't want to fight Demetrius Andrade. Okay, cool. You apparently want this Canelo Alvarez fight, but you're not willing to fight any of the top contenders to get to him. Like, you're going to have to. Now, of course, is Jermall Charlo better than some of the fighters that Canelo has faced of lately? Well, sure, he's better than Ildrim or whoever the hell that Turkish fighter was. But is Jermall Charlo really better than a Callum Smith? Who knows? We don't really know enough about Jermall Charlo to determine that because how many A-grade fighters has Jermall Charlo really faced? It is what it is. I would say overall that he's probably greater than Callum Smith with what he's just accomplished. But do we really know that Jermall Charlo would beat Callum Smith in a fight? Who knows? It is what it is. Anyway, so he pretty much has trapped himself in a corner. He's going to have to face David Benavidez or he's going to look like a damn fool. So we'll see what happens.
There's nowhere else for him to go but up. Up to 168 against David Benavidez. So yeah, guys, the boxing world, we really need this one. We really need...
I agree. The boxing world does need this. And you know who else needs this? Both Jermall Charlo and David Benavidez if they want that Canelo Alvarez fight. So we'll see.
This one. There's a serious drought this year, and this could definitely save the year. Or help save the year.
Well, we'll see, Dante. It's only March. So I wouldn't say necessarily that there's quite a drought so far. From what I heard, Anthony Joshua and Tyson Fury, they're going to be fighting this year. So I'm very excited about that, at least from what I've heard. That's definitely going to happen. I believe that Roman Chocolatito Gonzalez and Estrada, the rematch happened. I actually thought Chocolatito won that match. But anyway, so that was a great fight. You had Miguel Berchelt versus, what was his name? Oscar Valdez. So far, I would say that this is not a bad year at all. But anyway.
Let's see how long it takes for it to go down and contracts to be signed. That's all I got for now, guys. I'm on to the next one. All right, now check this out, guys.
And that's really about all I have for today, too. Interesting conversation. But I do agree with Dante that this would be a great fight. And I do agree with Dante that this is pretty much what Jermall Charlo needs to do. He has nowhere else to go. And he's pretty much trapped himself in a corner. It's time for Jermall Charlo to put his big boy pants on and live up to his name, Lions Only. And basically walk the walk. He's been talking that talk for a certain amount of years now. Well, David Benavidez is one of the only guys that have finally confronted him on his talk, and he is on the same stable. He is with the PBC, so it's going to look even worse if Jermall Charlo does not accept this fight. So we'll see what happens. I'm very excited for the possibility of this fight because I think this is a great fight. I would favor Charlo personally, but I would say that this is a 50-50 fight. Anyways, that's really about it. We'll see what happens. I hope this fight does happen. I would be very excited. Personally, I'd even buy this fight on pay-per-view. Would not surprise me if it was on pay-per-view. But anyway, that's really about it for today. Thanks so much for watching. I'll talk to you all later.